She had planned everything down to the last detail. The job offer, the city she would move to, the apartment she had already mentally furnished in her mind. And then in one quiet afternoon phone call, it was all gone. The company had rescinded the offer. No explanation, no apology, just silence on the other end of the line, and a life that suddenly looked completely unrecognizable. If you have ever stood at the edge of a moment like that, wondering whether the universe had simply forgotten about you, then what follows is going to feel like it was written exactly for you. There's a story most people never get to hear, and it begins not with success, but with collapse. Marcus had spent 3 years building toward a single dream. He had networked, studied, sacrificed weekends, turned down relationships, and poured everything he had into becoming the kind of professional that companies chase. When the offer finally came, he cried in his car, not because he was sad, but because he had genuinely believed there were moments in life when everything finally adds up. Then the call came, and Marcus did what most people do when life pulls the rug from under them. He went quiet. He stopped showing up. He convinced himself that the closed door was proof he was never meant to walk through it. What Marcus did not know then, and what researchers in the field of psychological resilience have consistently found, is that the human mind tends to overestimate how permanent a painful moment feels. Psychologists call it affective forecasting, the tendency to predict that a bad event will ruin us for far longer than it actually does. Studies from Harvard have shown that people dramatically overestimate how long they will feel devastated by a loss, while underestimating how powerfully they will adapt and rebuild. Patience in this context is not passive. It is one of the most scientifically validated tools a person can develop for long-term well-being and success. 3 months after the offer was pulled, Marcus received an unexpected message from a former colleague who had noticed one of his industry posts online. That colleague introduced him to a startup founder who was looking for exactly his skill set. The salary was higher. The role was more aligned with what Marcus actually cared about. The team was one he would have chosen himself if he had been given the blueprint. But none of that path would have opened if Marcus had gotten the first thing he asked for. The detour was not a punishment. It was a rerouting. This is what makes the concept of divine timing so difficult for modern people to sit with. We live in an era where everything is available instantly. Food arrives in minutes. Information loads in seconds. Relationships are swiped into existence. The culture has conditioned us to treat delay as failure and waiting as weakness. But some of the most enduring research on human achievement tells a very different story. A landmark study on delayed gratification found that individuals who could tolerate uncertainty and wait for better outcomes consistently performed better in nearly every measurable area of life, from financial health to emotional stability to the quality of their relationships. The hardest part about trusting that a door closed for a reason is that the reason rarely announces itself on time. It does not show up when you need it most. It does not come with a label or a timeline. It arrives quietly, sometimes years later, in the form of a life that looks nothing like what you originally planned and everything like what you actually needed. That is the nature of purpose. It is not always loud, it is not always early, but when it arrives, there is a recognizable clarity to it that no amount of forcing could have manufactured. Marcus eventually built a career that earned him more than a paycheck. He built one that gave him meaning. He often speaks now about that afternoon phone call as the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because the rejection felt good, but because what came after it was so clearly worth the wait. He says he would not trade the confusion of that season for anything, because the confusion taught him something patience never could have taught him without the pressure. It taught him who he was when things stopped going his way. There is a woman named Diane whose story carries the same thread. She applied to the same graduate program 4 times before she was accepted. 4 years of the same answer. 4 years of watching peers move ahead while she rebuilt her application and her confidence from scratch. On the 5th year, she walked into a program that had just hired a professor whose entire body of research aligned perfectly with her thesis. That professor became her mentor. That mentorship became the foundation of a career that has since changed lives in her field. Diane will tell you plainly that being rejected 4 times was the kindest thing that institution ever did for her. The universe, or life, or timing, or whatever name feels most honest to you, does not always explain its decisions in real time. Closed doors are not verdicts. Delays are not denials. And the pain of a season you didn't choose does not mean the next one has been canceled. What it means, more often than not, is that something better is being assembled behind a door you haven't yet found. The work of patience is simply staying present and open long enough to recognize it when it finally appears. So if you're in a season right now that feels like everything you built just fell apart, consider the possibility that the falling was not the end of your story. Consider that what looks like loss from the inside might be preparation from a wider view. The door that closed on you may have been the most generous thing life could have offered you, because behind it, down a road you haven't yet walked, something far more aligned with who you truly are is already waiting for you to arrive.